Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Dave Marlowe. He is a Vice President and Client Executive at Amentum. Dave, good to have you with us.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here.
And our topic today is less technology and technology deployment and more about the bigger issue of the way government and industry can not only interact, but understand one another and understand how they work so that the interaction can improve. And we should probably start with you, which is something we don't often do in these types of interviews, but you are fairly recently from the federal government, from a very specific part of the federal government. Tell us about that, and then we'll get into what it looks like from the industry standpoint and then get into the interplay there.
Well, sure, thanks. I just retired this past fall from the CIA. I spent a little over 30 years at CIA. I retired as Deputy Director for Operations, which meant I oversaw global operations overseas. I oversaw, at least nominally, all human intelligence operations for the U.S. government. I started off my intelligence career in the Army as a SIGINT, tactical SIGINT operator, and so since 1985, essentially I've been working in the intelligence community in one fashion or another. I landed at Amentum this fall. I came out of a gray world where people didn't talk about their work too much. I found Amentum appealing. It doesn't have big palatial corporate offices. You don't see its name flashing at sports events or signs on the subway or whatever. It just quietly does really good work.
Yeah, and just briefly maybe define operations. That includes procurement.
Espionage.
Okay. So it's not like the things that keep the lights on or keep items and technology flowing in, say procurement and market research and that kind of thing?
Operations at CIA means collecting intelligence. Collecting foreign intelligence.
All right, so now you are in industry.
That's correct.
And the point of view is really different from what you're used to for those 35 years, 30 years at the CIA. And what have you learned personally from having this complete, I would call it 180 degrees point of view change?
Yeah, I'm definitely on the other side of the equation at this point. If you're in operations, you're at the edge, and you typically say, "I need this thing," and it either shows up or it doesn't, and you don't think about where it came from. But the truth is, if you're doing operational activity abroad, particularly in a war zone or austere environments or in any of those sort of expeditionary situations, you're side by side with some contractor or a variety of different contractors, and in the intelligence world, you've got people doing everything from facility support to technical support to any kind of processing function or whatever. Intelligence is collecting information, safeguarding information, storing information, moving information, securing it, sifting it, processing it, cataloging it, sorting through it and analyzing it and making sense of it. And every step along that way, there is an industrial partner, and then there's support for all the resources that go into either the facilities or the technologies or whatever that enable those things. And so, for me, I was always conscious of the fact that there were industrial partners. I saw them at the front end as opposed to at the end of making them available and figuring out how do you put together a program that lasts for some time. So I'm not at all unfamiliar with where industrial partners fit in the process. What I'm learning is how you mate things up and make it work effectively for everybody. The truth is, if you've been downrange in any fashion in the past 20 years, you've worked with all kinds of industrial partners.
And with respect to operations and those that are aided, abetted, helped by contractors, as you mentioned, every step of the way, what are the big challenges these days? I mean, the world situation is the challenge, but I mean, in terms of operations, regardless of what the operation is, there must be common challenges that evolve over time for the IC.
Well, the first thing I'd start with is where does industry fit? And I was involved in all kinds of conversation about a concept which is inherently governmental functions. Mm-hmm. And there are certain things that must be done by somebody from the government. That often has to do with resource allocation or decisions things where the government is going to be liable in some fashion for the results. Those things must be done by the government. Everything else is subject to discussion. Should we have this contracted out? Should we have this function done by somebody else? And in many cases, it actually makes more sense to ask industry to support. The intelligence community is always oversaturated with tasks, and it makes sense to say, okay, this is a thing that's going to take either some research or it's going to take some kind of back-end support capability that we don't want to invest in. Let us purchase a finite set of it for some period of time, and the period of time may be years, from an industry partner. And all that, I think, is increasingly important is the intelligence community turns its energies and its attention to the current threat environment. Now, the intelligence community talks about the outside world in terms of threat, and it's not always menacing in the way that it sounds when you say threat, but that's how the intelligence community kind of assesses the world. And if you look at the most recent publication by the D&I, the Annual Threat Assessment, it kind of goes through it in kind of methodical detail, and it talks about everything from climate change to human migration that are social phenomena but have a national security impact, to things that are kind of right there that are legitimately threats, and those are things like the ambition of the People's Republic of China. That document fairly nicely prioritizes where the intelligence service needs to put its energy. Intelligence services, I should say, need to put their energy. And it's a good guideline, I think, for industry to say, okay, we can see what's a priority here, we can see where the investments are going to be made, we can see where the technologies and resources need to be delivered in order for us to be successful.
And just a detailed question in dealing with industry day to day and enlisting industry for some of those tasks, as you say, that may not be inherently governmental, which sometimes make more sense economically or efficiency-wise to farm out. There's always, especially in the IC, and maybe particularly in the IC, that there are things that only the government can know, even when dealing with very close contractors. It's different if you're maybe student loan programs or food stamps or this kind of thing, where there's no real secrets to national security. Probably to this day, there's things you can't tell family, that for the rest of your life, and this is the way it is. How do you manage the relationship so that you get the most out of industry when there's stuff that they just can never know?
Yeah, so I would argue with that a little bit. There are some incredibly sensitive activities that are undertaken by any of the intelligence community members in which there's a contract industry partner who's in the middle of the most detailed, difficult, challenging stuff.
So they're cleared, therefore
they're part of the team, and they know absolutely everything that they need to know in order to do their function. That doesn't mean that information is available for the totality of the industrial world, just as it's not available for the totality of the population of the intelligence community. There's stuff I was never read in on and shouldn't have been read in on, and that. So I think that kind of compartmentation, need to know rule applies within industry just as it does within the intelligence community. Where industry is a partner, in my experience, industry is a partner. You show up, you come from a different place, but once you're sitting there on the team, you're part of the team. And that's a reality that's appreciated by people doing the work across the intelligence community.
So here's the question I should have asked then. When bringing in a contractor, an external partner for a particular operational type of function, what is the challenge and is there a challenge beyond simply having clearance that individual is the right individual to support the particular operation?
Yeah, that's a reasonable question, but really the same calculation is made for somebody who's got an industry badge, or somebody who's got a U.S. government badge. Does the person have the skills and background and clearance for the job? Are they suitable for the job? Which is a different question. And when those things are matched and they're on the team, they're on the team.
All right, well, let's get to the essential question then. Now that you have switched to the industry side, what did you maybe wish you'd known from the government side? Or, what have you learned, I guess, is the real question.
So I think I have a much better understanding now of how complicated and cumbersome the process is of applying capability to need. And that's the thing, I understood it very well when I was in the intelligence community, but I understand it now in a more practical, tangible sense, trying to figure out, okay, what is it we can deliver here and how do we go about delivering it? The thing that I think is important to bear in mind is if you look at the DNI's threat assessment, if you look at where the intelligence community is turning today, it's focused on what the military calls the pacing threat. And the pacing threat, it's a term that I like because it actually describes what we're dealing with here. The pacing threat is the People's Republic of China government and the ambition to supplant the United States as the most powerful nation in the world, and in the process reorder the way business is done around the world, reorder economy and society and dominance. And that is an existential threat. And if you look at all the other things that the intelligence community views as threat, none of them are actually existential. Vladimir Putin has squandered whatever credibility he had and shown himself to be an overly ambitious regional power. He can be disruptive to the world economy, but he can't change our way of life. Terrorism is disruptive. You have to take your shoes off at the airport. There's always a chance of something small scale is going to happen, but terrorists are not going to upset the free market economy. The ambitions of the PRC will. And so the intelligence community is aimed at preventing that from happening at what I call kind of the subkinetic level, which is intense competition, not open conflict. And that's the role of the intelligence community, is to understand, anticipate, offer options, and kind of steer away from, maintain advantage without putting ourselves in a position of open conflict. That's where the energy of industry should be aiming. It doesn't mean that everything that you do is about the PRC, but if you pay attention to what's being said by government officials, you look at the FBI director, what he said in front of Congress, and he just was speaking at a conference in Vanderbilt this past week about the very clear, unabashed ambition of the PRC. That is the thing, that's the reference point that the government has in mind as they make decisions. And that's the reference point that industry should have in mind as they engage with the government. So if you follow that logic, the PRC it's into your cyber network here, probably. It's probably has access to your phone or mine. They're deliberate and methodical about having access and capability, disruptive capability everywhere. So if in industry you're working on something that directly relates to the PRC, that's great. But if you're working on something else that relates to national security, it's important that your own systems are secure, that your own supply chain is secure. Because what the intel community doesn't want is to buy your risk into their contract because you haven't been attentive to it. And that's a thing that industry can do on its own and should be doing. At this point, being able to say that your cyber systems are secure or your supply chain is secure, it's a differentiator for a company. It's not going to be long before it's an expectation and then a requirement, because we just have to collectively make ourselves more secure.
And if you look at China and the rest of the threats, pacing threats or just terror threats, whatever the case might be, things are happening fast. And often the procurement system, the interaction system between government and industry is, let's say, leisurely, to put it charitably. But often in some sense, you need emergency level thinking. How can industry and government speed up the tempo of working together on a regular basis, such that everything remains kosher, but things happen faster?
Yeah, I think that's a fundamental question. That a lot of my time in my last job was discussing exactly this. How do we engage more effectively with industry, with academia, with all the horsepower of America that sits outside of the government? And so what I would say is the will, the intent, the recognition is all there in the intelligence community. We all, I should say they all recognize the urgency of this. The systems for procurement it's just an outdated paradigm. It moves slowly, and even when it's not moving slowly, it's still populated by people at every step of the way, some of whom are aggressive and forward-thinking, and other people are maybe reluctant to take some kind of risk. And that's just the reality that we're all kind of dealing with. The government wants to move faster. It's constrained by its own process that it's not happy with. Industry would like for it to move faster as well. And you see evidence of DOD or parts of the IC using kind of special procurement authorities to move a little faster in one case or another. So that I have confidence that that's there. It's just a matter of engaging aggressively, sounds like the wrong word, but assertively on the side of industry. The other thing that I've certainly seen this at Amentum, and I'm sure other companies are doing this as well. If you've got a contract, a long-standing contract, there's no reason not to say we'd like to introduce this technology that everybody else in the world is using to make this process that we're doing for you, IC, work faster, smarter, more efficiently. And I've seen it a number of times with Amentum, like I say. And what that does is it takes something, introduces it into the secure environment. People say, okay, actually this works. We'd like to have that here, here, and here, or something like it, and kind of push the thing along. My point is that we have a willing partner in the U.S. government that would like to move beyond the existing paradigm, recognizes the urgency, and wants deliberate partners. And I think the most important thing that you can take away, and I used to say this in my old job, be conscious, be deliberate about what you're doing. Know why you're doing it. And if you're conscious of the fact that we've got this pacing threat that really is an existential threat to our American way of life, we act differently, and we're more deliberate, we're more patient maybe when we're trying to figure out how do we make something work. But that's a big thing that industry can bring to a partnership that the government desperately needs.
Yeah, so the government sometimes is aware of the need, but maybe is a little risk averse in the environment that it operates in.
The process itself can be risk averse. It was designed at a time when everybody was insular. The agencies didn't talk to one another, and certainly didn't talk to anybody else. And it's moving forward. Folks want to not be stuck with what they have, but it's still an evolution.
Right. So the essential element then between government and industry to enable that is trust.
That's right. That's right. That's a good way to put it.
All right. Well, we'll leave it on that note. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
My guest has been Dave Marlowe. He's a vice president and client executive at Amentum. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. You've been listening to Top Voices, creating a safer, smarter, cleaner world. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Amentum.